The monitor I have next to me here is the BenQ EX3203R. It's an impressive 32-inch 1440p 1800 radius curved VA panel with 144hz refresh rate and HDR 400 and Freesync 2 support, so it's actually pretty impressive. We're going to take a look at it, run you through obviously a tour of the features, a tour of the monitor itself, and then talk you through the panel and then the gaming experience is listed as a gaming monitor, and then give you a bit of an idea of its price and if it's worth your money. So let's start off with the features. So as I said, this is a 32-inch 1440p 1800 radius curved VA panel. As I said, we'll cover that in full detail in a second, but suffice to say it's impressive in its color accuracy, viewing angles, and gaming experience. As I said, it's a 144hz panel as well, which is actually a true 144hz panel. I did my usual 180 FPS capture and it was incredibly smooth and no frames were skipped in the UFO test frame skipping test, so that's all good to see. It's also claimed a 4 millisecond gray to gray response time, and sadly I don't have equipment to test that at the moment, so we're going to have to make do with taking BenQ's word for it, which isn't always necessarily the best thing to do, but from my experience it does seem to line up with that, so that's all good. And otherwise, as I said, it has HDR 400 support, which is not the highest end HDR available, but it's nice to have as an option as it does add a little bit of extra dynamic range. And the panel is only an 8-bit panel, so you're not going to get the full sort of setup anyway. And you do have Freesync 2 support, which is essentially just normal FreeSync, but also with HDR built in as well. Now, one of the main features that this monitor has over a number of its other competitors, including one that I believe has the exact same panel from ASUS, the XG32VQ, I think, is actually their eye care stuff. So they have a small sort of sensor bar down here that has an ambient light sensor that allows you to set up their BI plus and eye care sort of settings to allow you to have it automatically change the brightness and I believe even color temperature to suit the room that you're in and the settings that you're in, so that you get the best and sort of the least worst setup for your eyes, which is definitely nice to have. It's obviously something that a lot of people do have some issues with, so it's nice that that comes built in. So now you know the features, let's take a look at the monitor itself. Now from the front you have effectively very thin bezels all around except for the chin bar, which we tend not to worry about anyway, but you actually have a flush bezel too, which is quite nice. It makes for a nice aesthetic on the front, and while there is a little bit of an air gap with the panel on the sort of when you're sitting at an angle like this, you really don't notice it when you're sitting straight on, which is what you're going to want to do with a curved monitor anyway, so it's not too much of an issue. The stand on the monitor takes up a fairly large portion of your desk, so bear that in mind. It's two very kind of chrome feet that stick out. It is actually very stable, which is quite nice, and overall you do have a bit of adjustability in terms of a fair amount of tilt and a little bit of height adjust as well, although no rotation or swivel, so you can't put this in portrait mode for example, but being a curved monitor you tend not to want to do that anyway, so that's not too much of an issue. And as far as I can see, it doesn't seem to have a VESA mount. I could be wrong, but as far as I can see it doesn't have that, so I'm glad that the stand that's included is rather nice. There is also a fairly large cable management hole on the back of the stand with a chrome accent again, so actually quite nice for cable managing. And they also include effectively like a blanking plate or a cover that goes over the rear I/O to again make it a bit easier for cable managing and a bit more neat and tidy. Speaking of the rear I/O, we may as well talk about that. So as you can see, it's a pretty impressive setup. We've got DC in and audio out, as well as two HDMI ports, a DisplayPort port, two USB Type A ports, and a USB Type C port. Now the port that is most interesting here is actually that Type C port, because it not only allows for a display input, but also allows you to use those two USB Type A ports as, you know, a USB hub. The most impressive thing though is that in the menu settings you can actually change it from a 1440p 60Hz with those USB 3 ports running in full USB 3 mode, or you can change it to run at the full 144Hz but have those USB 3 ports run in USB 2 mode. And while we're talking about the menu, we may as well talk through that. The buttons are on the right hand side and you have a number of sort of quick options that you can change, but overall the actual menu itself is nice and easy to navigate. You can change all the features including their eye care settings and the BI plus, so that is all nice to see. And as I said, there's a lot of customizability but also fairly easy to navigate around. Jumping back to the tour of the monitor, on the back you actually have a very stylish aesthetic. You have a BenQ curved monitor kind of text on the top, and you also have another chrome BenQ logo on the back as well. And otherwise, as I said, it's just a fairly stylish kind of monitor that I think would suit well in an office or in home, so that's quite cool to see. So I think we need to talk about the panel. It's a VA or vertical alignment panel, and generally that means that it suffers from a few issues that TN normally does but IPS normally doesn't, and it's normally a kind of middle ground between TN and IPS. But what's interesting about this one is that this one is just incredible. In terms of viewing angles, which is where VAs normally fall down generally, at least compared to IPS monitors, this one is just, as I said, incredible. Side to side is normally not too much of an issue, and as you can see, this one really doesn't have any issues with that. But top to bottom is normally where, at least in my experience, VA panels tend to break down a little bit, but this one is incredibly impressive. Well, of course, you don't want to be watching a film or whatever from 85 degrees on the floor looking up at your monitor. This one you basically can, because there's none of that usual polarization or color shifting that happens. So overall, very impressive. In terms of color accuracy, as usual, I was testing with my Spider 5, and again, I was really very impressed. Now, the box and BenQ's website list this as supporting 90% of the DCI-P3 color gamut by coverage, but in my experience and in my testing here, it was only able to reach about 80%. With that said, though, reaching 100% of, or around about 100% of the sRGB spectrum, and also around about 77% of the Adobe RGB spectrum is very impressive, especially for a VA panel. It means that if you want to do some light color sensitive work while also playing lots of games, then this is actually a very nice shout. Now, of course, being a gaming display, we need to talk about, well, gaming on it too. And while I was testing with an RX 480 in CSGO, because that's the easiest configuration to get high frame rates and generally make use of them, but my experience was very, very kind of positive here. It was very smooth. It was a just generally great experience, and I genuinely do recommend it a fair bit. Of course, if you're planning on getting this monitor and you want to play more than just CSGO or any other sort of relatively lightweight titles, then you're gonna want something like a Vega 56 or a Vega 64 for kind of optimal experience. Obviously, being 1440p and 144Hz, you're gonna need a fair bit of power to push it, especially at high settings, but I think you're gonna have a great time with this, because as I said, especially with Freesync on, it's incredibly smooth, still looks really nice as well, but plays very well too. And of course, we need to talk about its price. Now, at the time of filming in the UK, this monitor is selling for £460 to £470. Of course, that may change, so if you want to check out the price where and when you watch this, take a look at the link in the description down below and see for yourself. But regardless, that price is pretty decent for this monitor, if a little on the high side. Now, there are a number of budget monitors, even in the 1440p 144Hz category, that are a bit cheaper, but at the same time, being as impressive as this one is with its color accuracy, with its viewing angles, and generally just its aesthetic, and of course, if you like the curve, then the curve as well, I think this puts it in a fairly decent price category. Now, there is actually a very similar, I believe, one that uses the same panel from ASUS, the XG32VQ, and that one is actually selling for the same price, but that one's older, so I believe doesn't support the HDR and FreeSync 2 that this one does, and of course doesn't have the eye care stuff, but at the same time is obviously basically the same panel, so in theory could have some sort of firmware update to support that possibly, but either way, both of those monitors are still very impressive. Of course, this one having those extra features does make it a little bit better value for money, although of course I know that saying value for money in £460, £470 for a lot of people is going to be a bit of a shock to the system, and obviously fair play to you, I understand, but at the same time it is definitely pretty impressive when it's compared to even its more expensive G-Sync competition. Of course, the question I always ask is, would I put this on my desk? And I'd be happy to say yes. Of course, while I use an NVIDIA graphics card myself, and so I wouldn't be able to make use of the adaptive sync technologies here, the fact that this is £100 to £200 cheaper than a G-Sync alternative means that I'd probably go with this one over any G-Sync version, so bear that in mind if you are planning on picking a new monitor up. If you're willing to spend the extra money on G-Sync, then it could be worth it for you if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, but if you do have an NVIDIA graphics card, this monitor still works perfectly fine with it, so it's up to you if you do want the adaptive sync and pay the extra money, or stick with no adaptive sync and have a great monitor with a bit of extra money left in your pocket. With that said though, that is my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. Is this a monitor you're interested in? Is it too too expensive? Do you want G-Sync, or is Freesync too interesting to you? Any and all of those, let me know in the comments down below, and of course if you have any questions about it, feel free to leave those down there too. Otherwise, as I said, if you want to check out the monitor or check out pricing when and where you watch this, then take a look at the link in the description down below. There's also a load of other links down there too, from Amazon and Overclockers UK affiliate links to private internet access, which is a great and cheap VPN. There's Humble Bundle for cheap games. There's merch if you want to pick up a hoodie like this one, or different designs too, and a load of other stuff down there too. It all massively helps me out and keeps me making these videos on a Monday, Wednesday and Friday basis, with live streams on Thursday nights. So I massively thank anyone who uses any of them, because as I said, it really does help. But otherwise, that is kind of it. Feel free to subscribe for more videos, as I said, every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and there's plenty of other videos over there that you can check out. Otherwise, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video.